Hello everyone, this is Paul Malutnak, and we are continuing our study through the book of Revelation. We're in chapter 17, and let's begin reading with verse 1, and then I'll give you a little bit of a summary of what we're going to talk about, in particular these next two chapters, 17 and 18. So verse 1, Then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and said to me, Come, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute who is seated on many waters. Now this connects this judgment here in chapter 17 with the last seven plagues being poured out. Remember, there are seven angels that poured out the seven bowls, and that was back in chapter 16. One of those angels comes and tells John about the harlot religion, and that's what this chapter is really going to be about, the destruction of the harlot religion. This connects the judgment with the last seven plagues being poured out. It's not an additional event, it's just an angel who steps out and he says, I've told you about the destruction, now let me tell you what it is that's going to be destroyed. It is a religious system. This chapter, 17, is about a religious system. Chapter 18 is about an economic or religious material system. So he's no longer describing the judgments as the seals or the trumpets or the bowls, but he's describing what and who is being destroyed by those judgments, okay? So here you have in these two chapters a very comprehensive description of the final system of Satan in the book of Revelation, or for that matter, anywhere else. The bowl judgments are going to be the last judgments. Chapter 16 described them. They end in verse 21 with these huge hailstones coming down and crushing people. And whatever earth dwellers survive that, of course, is going to be destroyed when Christ returns to Armageddon and destroys the gathered armies of the world. So chapter 16 really ends just before Christ returns. But Christ doesn't return until chapter 19. So we have 17 and 18 put in to describe for us the system that's going on in the world that will be destroyed by the bowls and destroyed by the return of Christ. Now, the chronology halts, the scene goes back, it looks carefully at the kingdom being destroyed. So one of the seven angels then comes and says, Come here, I shall show you. This is an invitation to a great scene, not only for John, but for all of us. The angel says, Come here, I will show you a harlot. Look at chapter 21, verse 9, if you want to think about that, just as an interesting comparison. Chapter 21, verse 9 has similar, the introduction. It says, One of the seven angels who had the seven bowls full of the seven last plagues came and spoke with me, saying, Come here, I shall show you. Not a harlot, but what is he going to show you? Well, he's going to show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb. There it is. So the bride, the wife of the Lamb, the true church, cleansed from every stain, from all the defilements by the shed blood of the Lamb. The bridegroom of the Lord, pure, holy, virtuous, magnificent, and wonderfully glorious forever. But here is the harlot, mother of harlotries and abominations, and filthiness of idolatry. So before I show you the bride, he says, I got to show you the harlot. I'm going to show you what happens to the great harlot. The theme in the judgment of this chapter is judgment. It takes a while to get to it, but that is the theme. When that judgment falls, by the way, heaven rejoices. Chapter 19, verse 3 says they're shouting hallelujah because the smoke of the destroyed Babylon rises up forever and ever. The great harlot is really a metaphor for spiritual false religion, idolatry, okay, religious apostasy, and prophetic language, prostitution, fornication, adultery equals idolatry. And we've noted the last time that in the Old Testament, several cities are called harlot cities because their population was involved in idol worship. In Nahum chapter 3, verse 1 and 4, Nineveh is described as a harlot city. In Isaiah, Tyre is described as a harlot city. In Isaiah, sadly, Jerusalem is described as a harlot city. How is the faithful city become a harlot, said Isaiah? Any city that has prostituted itself, committing spiritual fornication, is a harlot city. So the harlot is now to be exposed. Let's look at the authority of the harlot. This religion will be authoritative in the world. Notice this little phrase, the great harlot who sits on many waters. Who sits? Sitting is the mark of distinction. Sitting is what kings did. They sat on the throne. It was a position of sovereignty, authority. Some archaeological material from Egypt and in the Near East and the Greek word affirms that fact, that sitting was always to be seen as a distinctive posture of deity. It symbolizes rule, taking a place or taking one's place on a throne is authority. Notice also it says sitting on many waters. Another metaphor. Cities were located, seated by waters. In ancient times, water supply was everything. And so no great city like Babylon could ever exist apart from water. So great cities were built by waters, near waters, sea, rivers, lake, spring. Babylon of old was built by the banks of the Euphrates. In fact, Jeremiah 51:13 says, speaking of Babylon, O thou that dwellest upon many waters. Babylon has canals, trenches, marshes. In fact, they tell us that one of the 7 wonders of the world was the city of Babylon because they had developed a sophisticated air conditioning system using dripping water through which wind passed. And as Babylon was built by many, near many waters, taking its seat there, so this great harlot is depicted in the imagery as seating by many waters. So the meaning of that, verse 15 of the chapter tells you, and he said to me, the waters which you saw were the harlot. It's our people, multitude, and nations and tongues. And so it was in ancient times when a city was built by a great waterway. And what did that bring? Well, that brought trade from everywhere. It meant peoples and nations and tribes and tongues and everything would come to that place. So here you have Babylon, the seat of authority, and the great harlot has sovereignty, and the great harlot sits, as it were, in the position of commanding all kinds of people, all kinds of multitudes and tongues and nations, and et cetera, et cetera. And again, it's a fourfold description of the ungenerate world in the future. The authority of Babylon is immense. The world religion will sit in the commanding position over all the peoples of the world. They'll all come to worship the Babylonian system. Okay? So secondly, not only the authority of Babylon is revealed here as the exposed harlot is seen, but the alliances of the harlot, the authority and then the alliances. Let's look at verse 2 and 3. With whom the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality, and with the wine of those of whose sexual immorality the dwellers on earth have become drunk. And he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, that was full of blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns. So these 2 verses introduce us to the alliances of the harlot, so the associations of them. First, the harlot religion is associated with kings of the earth. Of course, then maybe they won't be kings, maybe they'll be presidents and premiers and military leaders, whatever it would be at that time. In this vision, John sees that the harlot is engaged in committing acts of immorality with the leaders of the earth. The scope of this influence is tremendous. The harlot becomes the ally of the whole world on the highest level of leadership. The kings, the leaders, the sovereign, the presidents, the emperors, the dictators, the premiers, all the prime ministers, whatever they're called at the time, everyone comes to Mother Babylon. And their intercourse is described as fornication, the Greek word porneia. The symbolism of spiritual adultery is not used because adultery is a word used to define sexual sin on the part of someone who is married. And these heathen nations do not have, or they ever known any God. They are not his. They never were his bride or his wife. And so what they did is not in technically sense adultery, though that's what it is in the case of the nation, Israel, but not pagan nations. It's fornication is what it's called. It is idolatry, but it is clearly indicated here that it is fornication. And the term is always used of the people here who worship other deities, people who may name the name of the true God, but prostitute themselves to another deity. The concept of spiritual adultery is used in describing Israel's apostasy. You could see that in Ezekiel 16 and 23 and other places, the same thing. John sees these kings, these leaders from all over the world committing fornication with the harlot. That is, becoming absorbed in this religious power. Deceived by the false prophet, the demons, seducers, Satan, the Antichrist, all the leaders of the world come together and they're prostituting themselves for one solitary religion. They go to bed with the same harlot, end up with the same infectious disease, and are killed. It's amazing that the whole world has come together on this basis. Okay, so, well, we've proven that it can't come together on a political basis. If you think about the United Nations or any of these groups, they can never seem to come together. Vast cultures and economics and everything, they can't do it based on politics or anything else. But the alliance is not just with rulers. It says also in verse 2, with whom the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality, and the wine of whose sexual immorality the dwellers on earth have become drunk. Those who dwell on the earth is another one of those terms in the book of Revelation, and we've talked about that one before. Earth dwellers, those people who are unregenerate, those people who are not believers, and they are not committed, they are not born again, they don't belong to Christ. The same folks described in verse 15, the people, multitudes, nations, and tongues, the unregenerate, they all fall into this. They're all victimized. Back in chapter 13, when the religion of Antichrist was being introduced, and they were worshiping the dragon, who is, of course, Satan, and they were worshiping the beast. It says in verse 8, all who dwell on the earth will worship him. All of them fall into it. And so fall into, in verse 14 of chapter 13, he says, he deceives those who dwell on the earth dwellers. Okay, that is the false prophet deceiving all the people on the earth who are not believers. They all come, they all worship the beast who has had a false counterfeit resurrection. Remember, that beast supposedly rose from the dead, just like Jesus, but it was counterfeit. Everybody gets stuck on this deception and gets sucked in on it. And they were all in the imagery, they're all made drunk with the wine of her sexual immorality. And he's not talking about real wine or drinking. He's talking about sexual immorality. He's talking about becoming a part of a false form of religion. They all get drunk with it. They're intoxicated with it. It's a passion that they're just giving up themselves for this religion. Satan orchestrates the entire thing. All the people and the leaders come together in this great world religion. And there is yet another component in the alliances of the harlot. Let's look again at verse 3. He carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, full of blasphemous names, having 7 heads and 10 horns. So we often use that expression and say, well, you don't want to get carried away. But every time John gets carried away, something spectacular happens. He was getting used to being carried away. It happened to him in chapter 1. It happened again in chapter 21. The Holy Spirit just picks him up and takes him out to show him something else. He took him into a desert place, a lonely place, a place of desolation. He took him into a wasteland, surely the kind of place where the city of Babylon is today. And in that wasteland place somewhere, he took him by means of a vision. The vision came, the Holy Spirit had removed him from the conversation with the angel, taken him into the wilderness place. He said, I saw a woman. Who is that? It's the harlot Babylon. And there's sort of a nuance being added to the vision he's already seen. He says, and I saw her sitting on a scarlet beast. Well, who is the beast? It's the Antichrist. She's sitting on the beast. They are very well connected. The significance there is that the beast was supporting her. And some say it means that she was in charge because the rider's in charge of whatever he rides or whatever. Maybe both are true. I think that the beast supports her and at first may seem to be controlled by her. But I think the beast is in control. In other words, it is the religious system that really captures the world. It's the religious system that pulls the whole world together. Religious power is the controlling power. In the end, the world will turn to religion because economics and military might and politics are all crumbling around them at such a fast pace. All the powers of heaven and earth are shaking. The religious system begins then to take charge. And while the beast certainly supports the religious system, it is the religious system that is the controlling influence. They coexist for a while, but only for a while. Only for a while, because in verse 16 it says the beast will hate the harlot and make her desolate and naked and eat her flesh and burn her up with fire. Do you know what's going to happen? Well, the beast is going to rise up and devour the religious system and absorb it into itself. You see, the beast can't handle someone else getting too much attention, and evidently the harlot got too much attention. Okay, and I believe that that's when the worship of the world turns towards Antichrist, and he becomes the one that the whole world worships. And we find that in chapter 13 when the false prophet, who must have started this whole religion, now demands that the whole world worship Antichrist. He is the God of the new religion. He falsifies a resurrection to make him seem credible, does signs and wonders more for the credibility, and the beast swallows up and devours the coexisting religion and the system. And now you have one system which involves the material side and the worship of the Antichrist in one sort of Babylonian system. The beast further is described in verse 3 as a scarlet beast, the color of luxury, splendor, royalty. Isaiah could tell you the color of sin, and some would say the color of blood. We could conclude a luxurious splendorous, royal, sinful, bloody beast. And it says further of the beast that he was full of blasphemous names, because the world is now identifying him as God. So anything he could say against the real God obviously is blasphemous, and he's doing a lot of it. They're identifying him as God. And he, back in chapter 13, it says on his horns were 10 diadems. Okay, those are the crowns that belong to a king. And on them, the heads, they had blasphemous names. It said on his heads were blasphemous names. Here it says full of blasphemous names. They were all over him everywhere. Okay, self-deification, identifying himself as God by every name that God would have, perhaps calling himself the Almighty, the Sovereign, the Creator, the Giver of life. Who knows what is blasphemous names? He'll take every name that belongs to God and wear it himself. Don't really exactly know what they are, but we know they're against God. Daniel saw something of this blasphemy. In chapter 7, it says he will speak out against the Most High. In other words, he blasphemes God by what he says, and he blasphemes God by what he claims for himself. Chapter 11 of Daniel, verse 36, says, he will do as he pleases. He will exalt and magnify himself above every god. He will speak monstrous things against the God of gods. And that's our Lord. That is the blasphemy, self-deification, and the self-deified Antichrist coexist, riding along, bearing on his back this system that's been used by Satan to grab the entire world and put them under. It further describes the scarlet beast as having 7 heads. Having 7. Go down to verse 9. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. And they are 7 kings. 5 are fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he must remain a little while. So later we'll talk about that. But the 7 heads represents 7 mountains and 7 kings. 5 who are fallen, 1 who exists, and yet another one to come. So it refers to the past and present governments at that time. And then the beast also has 10 horns. Over in verse 12, 10 horns are 10 kings. Verse 13 says, those 10 kings have one purpose and give their power and authority to the beast. So this beast is sort of a fulfillment of all the past empires of the world, and it is the combination of the final 10 powers that come together to form the future government. We'll say more about that later. This shows us that the alliances are total, they're comprehensive. He is allied with all the rulers of the world. The harlot is allied with the false religious system and allied with all the rulers of the world and all the people of the world. And it is the culmination of all the governments of the past and the affirmation and summation of all the governments of the future. In other words, it's a world-dominating religious system in every sense possible. No great world system to be crushed, or should I say one great world system to be crushed by Satan when he says, no more religion apart from the beast. And then he devours that system, makes the whole world worship the Antichrist, which they willingly do because they are deceived by him. And then Christ comes and destroys that system. One world religion is coming. Prostitutes historically have generally adorned themselves in finery to attract attention, to allure people with beauty. And the harlot Babylon is no different. Look at verse 4. It says, the woman has arrayed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of her sexual immorality. We'll just take the first part of that. She has clothed in purple and scarlet. Royalty, prosperity, nobility, wealth. This prostitute is going to be a prosperous prostitute. This is a high class one, if there is and could ever be one. This is one who has worked her trade and become extremely wealthy. This is one who has adorned herself. We read in Ezekiel 16 this. It says, "Thus you were adorned with gold and silver, and your dress was of fine linen, silk, and embroidered cloth. You ate fine flour, honey, and oil, so you were exceedingly beautiful and advanced to royalty. Then your fame went forth among the nations in account of your beauty, for it was perfect because of my splendor which I bestowed on you, declares the Lord God. But you trusted in your beauty, and you played the harlot because of your fame, and you poured out your harlotries on passerbys who might be willing." And the story continues on by saying, "You took some of your clothes, you made for yourself high places of various colors, you played the harlot on them, you took your beautiful jewels made by my gold and my silver, which I had given you, and made for yourself male images that you might play the harlot with them. You took your embroidered cloth, you covered them, and offered my oil and my incense before them." And then he goes on to indict them, and he says, and he's talking about Jerusalem here, "You had wealth and prosperity, and I gave it to you, and you prostituted all of it." Okay, so the woman is clothed in purple and scarlet. Scarlet has always been the color used by popes and cardinals. In fact, Pope Paul II made it illegal for anyone but a cardinal to wear a scarlet hat. A Roman ceremony goes back 300 years ago by Marcellus, a Roman archbishop, enunciated 5 articles of dress for popes and cardinals. All must be scarlet. They include a vest of pearl, gold, and precious stones. Now the harlot here is adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls. Interesting, very wealthy, tremendous wealth this harlot has. And so the Roman system today, hundreds and hundreds, billions of dollars, and it's not just Rome, but there's parallels with Rome very clearly, and it's more than that. It includes apostate Protestantism as well. John sees her having in her hand a gold cup, and that too takes us back to Jeremiah 51. Another evidence of wealth in this golden cup, but out of it comes abominations and unclean things of immorality. It's just very graphic. Dr. Barnhouse said this, quote, "It is also highly significant that the abominations and filthiness should be spoken of as coming from a golden cup. Babylon hath been a golden cup in the Lord's hand that made all the earth drunken. The nations have drunken of her wine, therefore the nations are mad," Jeremiah 51:7 says. Barnhouse continues, he says, "To those who are acquainted with the history of ancient religions, this significance is heightened by comparisons with the rites of the pagan religious mysteries. A French scholar, Salverte, writing on the occult sciences, tells of the drinking in connection with these demon ceremonies. He said to drink of mysterious beverages was indispensable part of all who sought initiation in these mysteries. This mysterious beverage were composed of wine, honey, water, and flour, and various other ingredients used locally. There can be no doubt that they were of an intoxication nature until the aspirants had come under their power, till the understandings had been dimmed and the passions excited by the medicated draught. They were not duly prepared for what they were either to hear or see." And that ends the quote by Barnhouse. The harlot, before he makes love to the victim, wants to make the victim drunk. She brings out the golden cup, so inviting. It's filled with abominations, and the unclean things of her immorality. You're drinking filth, and the apparel is very deceptive. This leads to a fourth aspect of her exposure. The authority of her, the alliances that she made, the clothes that she had on, and now the abominations of this harlot. There at the end of verse 4, we read them. The cup, as beautiful as it is full of filth. When the cup is offered in the ceremony, it defiles. It makes dirty. It makes filthy. It contains nothing but wickedness, abomination. All idolatry is abomination to God. In fact, in chapter 18, it speaks of Babylon as having sins piled up as high as to heaven. The system is wicked, vile, abominable, full of idolatrous obscenities, and the cup is full of unclean things of her immorality. Graphic. The cup is filled with a residue of her porneia, and the abominations continue in verse 5. Let's read that. And on her forehead was written a name of mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes and of earth's abomination, a name on the head. From Seneca to Juvenal, two ancient Roman writers, we learn it was customary for Roman prostitutes to wear a band with their name across it on their forehead. Jeremiah 3:3 even says, a harlot's forehead, parading their harlotry and their wretchedness without shame for everyone to see. They wore the name of harlotry, and so does this prostitute, and the name we've already seen, the source of all evil, giving birth to all false religion and idolatry, and now come home to mother. So we've seen her in her authority. And then in verse 6, it says, and I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. Like most harlots, this one is drunk. Only this one is drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. There's a difference in these two. The witnesses of Jesus are saints, and the saints are witnesses of Jesus. So they're really the same thing. Some would see the first as Old Testament saints and the latter as New Testament saints. Some would see it in just two ways of speaking the same thing. It's not really that important. But the point is that the harlot is a murderer, and her murder began in the Old Testament. No question about it. Proceeded from the beginning right through to the end. From those Old Testament saints through to those who gave testimony to Jesus. False religion, born at Babylon, was always been the murderer of true saints. While the world becomes drunk with lust for her, she becomes drunk too, with the blood of God's people. She's getting drunk on something else. You can look back at the best estimates are that just the Roman system itself has killed 50 million through the centuries. 1 million in the Inquisition alone, and then about the massacre of St. Bartholomew, where Protestants were butchered, and the people, in response to the butchering of the Protestants in St. Bartholomew, appointed a religious thanksgiving service and struck commemorative medals. It's not just that religion, though, that has murdered the saints. All false religions through the centuries have hated the truth, and many of them have had occasion to slaughter the saints. So this is her exposure, and this is some vision. And we read at the end of verse 6, when I saw her, I wondered greatly. Shock, astonishment, fright. What other reaction can there be? This is where religion is headed. Before all of this comes to place, we believe the church will be taken out in the rapture. Then comes the time of tribulation, and the time of tribulation comes, the false prophet rallies the world coexisting with the beast and the material kingdom. Somewhere around the middle of that time, they merge into one great system. It has a spiritual side and a material side, and both will be destroyed at the return of Christ. Let's look at verse 7. It says, "But the angel said to me, why do you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast and 7 heads and 10 horns that carry her." Well, it seems to be a silly question. At the end of verse 6, John's writing, "And when I saw her, I marveled greatly." And we don't argue with what he said. We wouldn't question it. If you saw something like that, you'd wonder too, I suppose. But the question is not supposed to attach itself to that kind of understanding. What the angel, I think, is really saying here is, why are you so worried about what this means? Don't worry about it. I'm going to tell you what it means. I will show you a mystery of this woman and the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and 10 horns. The angel is saying, you don't need to wonder. You don't need to be left in the dark. I'm here, and I'm going to explain it. I'll take care of your confused amazement, your confusion at this point. I tell you the mystery, and I will explain it to you. Now, we go further. The mystery to John is surely not that it is a religious system. That's not the mystery. But the mystery to John is how the system relates to the scarlet beast. By now, John knows about the beast. He was introduced to in chapter 13, very clearly defined as the world ruler whom all the world worships. Back in chapter 13, the whole world worships the beast. Now, when a new component is introduced on the religious side, a harlot who is pulling together a worldwide system of false religion, the question then comes, if the whole world is worshiping the beast, how does this harlot thing fit in? How is the woman connected to the beast? Who's the beast? How does that work together? It may well be that the key idea here is implied when the angel says, I shall show you a mystery of the woman and the beast that carries her. This phrase, that carries her, to explain to you their relationship, because that's essentially what the rest of the section explains. Notice that the beast, this one who's really the ultimate and final Antichrist, though there are many Antichrists, John says that ultimately in the final form, this is the beast that is the Antichrist, which is the most heinous and powerful of all. This one is defined as having 7 heads and 10 horns in the vision. Now, this is also stated in verse 3, where the scarlet beast, full of blasphemous names, has 7 heads and 10 horns. So before we look at the beast and the description of the beast that starts immediately in verse 8, we rearrange these verses because it might help a little bit. The question in John's mind is, how does this harlot religious system work together with the beast and the whole world is worshiping? How can there be 2 if there's one world religion? Now, we first look at the harlot. Since in verse 7, John is told, I'll tell you the mystery of the woman, the harlot. Let's look at the harlot, okay? So to do that, we go to verse 18, all the way to the end, all the way to verse 18. And the woman whom you saw is the great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. Now, keep in mind, he's explaining who this woman is, who this harlot is. First was the exposure in verses 1 through 6. Then from verse 7 on is the explanation. I will tell you about this woman and the beast. And when he says that, he digresses for all those verses in the middle to discuss the beast. But we go right to the woman because it's easier to grasp it that way. Who is the harlot? Who is this woman? Well, this woman is the religious system. It is the great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. It is actually a geographical city. Well, I can say it says city, but you can get real specific or make it mean anything you want, but that's just speculation. Apparently the safest literal grammatical a historical interpretation of the text would tell us that apparently in the final form of world religion, connected to the Antichrist from Babylon, the political, economic, and all that, the ancient city of Babylon will play a role. Babylon then may well refer to a city, but not only a city. There aren't many students of prophecy in Scripture who would strongly hold to a literal rebuilding of Babylon, but it can't be limited to that. It is Babylon perhaps as a city, capital city for the Antichrist empire, but it's also Babylon, the name for the worldwide system of satanic rule. So, while it may be a real city, what role does it play? It may be a ceremonial city, it may be a capital city, but it's emblematic of an entire world empire through and including the city of Babylon. The empire of Babylon, the harlot mother, will reign over the kings of the earth by her seduction. So, some thoughts on the literal character of Babylon. In Isaiah 13 and 14, Jeremiah 50 and 51, the Old Testament prophets, Isaiah and Jeremiah, spoke about the final destruction of Babylon. They gave a very detailed description of how Babylon ultimately would be destroyed as a city. And when they were talking about the literal city of Babylon. But what they predicted only partially happened in history past to this day. Some of what they predicted took place to Babylon when the Medo-Persians conquered the Babylon Empire. Some of what they predicted took place in the gradual, slow decline of Babylon in the centuries that followed. But by no means have all the aspects of the prophecy against the city of Babylon ever been fulfilled. And because of that, there is reason to assume that it will exist again in some way, in order that the final predictions stated specifically about this place may come to pass. So in order for all those components of the prophecies against Babylon to be fulfilled, Babylon has to be there, and it has to be destroyed in the end. So there's prophetic reasons for a rebuilt and then final destroyed Babylon. And it's more than a simple curiosity that Babylon is going to be rebuilt. Babylon is a great place to build a city from which to rule the world, if indeed it is to be used that way. But it's near the geographic center of all the Earth's land masses, located strategically at the crossroads of Asia, Europe, and Africa. It has a great water supply. In fact, the historian Arnold Toynbee used to stress to his students that Babylon would be the best place in the world to build a future world cultural metropolis. So the world religious system will somehow be connected with that great city of Babylon, which will be in a sense the capital city of the Antichrist empire. Now the waters of this imagery and the harlot sitting beside represent this great Babylon-ish world, religion, economic system with its capital city as being the focal point for nations to come. The water that is alongside the harlot city represents the worldwide influence. Just as the waters make access for people to come to cities, the waters represents the people and the multitudes and nations and tongues. The common expression is repeated many times in Revelation, and it's always had the same common expression, meaning the nations of the whole world. So there will be a city in which there is a system, and the system will become the Mecca for the worldwide religion, as well as in chapter 18, the worldwide economy. The city then becomes this place. The system becomes the place in which the whole world traffics. It's the capital city of the world empire of Satan. Babylon the city, Babylon the Great. So we go back to verse 8, and the angel chooses to give to John a rather lengthy explanation of the beast that runs from verse 8 all the way to 14. Why does he do this? Well, he does this because this is where John's question lies. He's going to explain the significance of the harlot. But in order to understand the significance of the harlot, you have to understand their relationship to the beast. And that's what's in John's mind. That's the question that seems to bother him. So here's the explanation of this Greek word, atherion, for the wild beast that she's going to be riding on. She's sitting on this scarlet beast, in which verse 3 says. Now we're going to continue on verse 8 in part 2, and this will conclude part 1. And so I thank you for tuning in and listening and studying along with me. And I hope that you come back for part 2, and we'll continue on in chapter 17 of the book of Revelation. May God bless. Thank you.